Change is one of the scariest words in the human vocabulary. We like comfort, we like rhythm, we like to know what's coming next. And yet life has a way of moving us, shaking us, and sometimes even breaking us in order to build us. You see, every shift in your life, every disruption, every detour, none of it catches God by surprise. While you're pacing the floor, wondering how you're going to make it, heaven is already orchestrating a plan. Change has a way of shaking us. It doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up, sometimes like a quiet whisper, other times like a roaring storm. And the truth is, most people don't fear the idea of change itself. They fear the uncertainty that comes with it. They fear what they cannot see. When life shifts under your feet, it makes you feel like you've lost control, like you're standing in the middle of a story you didn't write, and you don't know how the next chapter will end. But hear me clearly, when God is at work in your life, change is not something to run from, it's something to embrace. Because what feels like loss today could be the very ground where your breakthrough begins tomorrow. We all like comfort zones because they make us feel safe. We get used to certain routines, certain people, certain patterns. But God is not in the business of keeping you comfortable. He's in the business of growing you. And growth demands change. Sometimes that change comes in the form of a closed door, and it leaves you wondering why God would allow something you depended on to end. But often, that closed door is the very thing that prevents you from walking into destruction. You didn't lose. It was God's protection. You didn't get left behind. You got redirected. Think about the children of Israel. They got so used to Egypt that even though it was bondage, it felt familiar. And when God brought them out, they struggled with the shift. They cried for the comfort of chains because freedom felt uncertain. Isn't that what many of us do? We cling to what is broken because it's familiar, and we resist what God is trying to bring because it feels unfamiliar. But hear this, God never removes without replacing. He never subtracts without intending to multiply, and he never shakes your foundation without the intention of building you on something stronger. Sometimes change feels like rejection, but it's really preparation. Sometimes it feels like endings, but it's really beginnings disguised in ways you can't yet recognize. God doesn't just change your environment, he uses change to transform you. The disappointment that forced you to move forward, the relationship that ended, the job that didn't work out, those weren't accidents. Those were divine shifts. What you call loss, God calls positioning. What you call chaos, God calls construction. But let me tell you why you don't need to fear it. Because the one who holds your future is the same one who orders your steps. He's already gone ahead of you. He knows what he's building. You may not see the blueprint, but he does. And if he has allowed something to change, it's because he intends to grow you beyond the limits of where you are. Don't mistake discomfort for abandonment. Don't confuse uncertainty with instability. When God is at work, every shift, every movement, Every change is under his sovereign control. So when life starts to move in ways you didn't plan, don't panic, lean in. Don't let fear drive you, let faith anchor you, because God never changes his mind about his promises. He may change the route, but he won't change the destination. He may shift the method, but he won't shift the mission. Every change you face is simply a chapter in a bigger story that ends with victory, not defeat. So don't be afraid of change. The ground may feel shaky, the scenery may look unfamiliar, but if God is behind it, then the shift is working for you, not against you. The very change you fear may be the very door that leads you into everything you've been praying for. Change is not the end, it is the setup. And if God is at work, then you can rest assured you're being moved closer to promise, closer to purpose, closer to destiny. Fear not the change, embrace it. Because if God allowed it, it's not breaking you, it's building you. And what he's building will not fail. One of the hardest truths to accept is that disappointment is often the disguise of destiny. You prayed for something to work out. You believed for a door to stay open. You poured your heart into a dream. And when it didn't go the way you expected, the sting of disappointment set in. But here's the secret that only those who walk closely with God begin to understand. What looks like a setback is often the seed of a setup. What feels like the breaking of your heart is often the shaping of your future. Disappointment has a way of clouding your vision. It makes you think that what you lost is greater than what you could gain. It convinces you that the closed door means God said no forever. But if you've lived long enough, you know that sometimes God shuts a door not because he's denying you, but because he's protecting you. He knows what's on the other side of that door. He knows what you cannot see. And he loves you too much to let you settle in a place that would have destroyed you. Think about Joseph. His own brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery, and left him for dead. If you stop the story right there, it looks like disappointment won. It looks like betrayal won. But if you keep reading, that very pit was the pathway to the palace. God used what was meant for evil and turned it into positioning for good. The disappointment of being thrown away became the divine setup for being lifted up. Some of you are crying over what walked away, but what you don't realize is that God is making room for something greater. You're holding on to the ashes when he's trying to hand you beauty. You're rehearsing the pain when he's trying to write a new chapter. Don't let the shadow of disappointment blind you from the light of his promise. Sometimes you don't recognize the promise until after the pain has passed. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. And here's the thing. You have to learn to trust the timing of God. We live in a culture that wants everything now. We want instant answers, instant success, instant gratification. But God works in seasons. Just because you don't see the fruit doesn't mean the seed isn't growing. Just because the tree looks bare doesn't mean the roots aren't deepening. Disappointment may feel like barrenness, but but beneath the surface, God is preparing a harvest you cannot yet see. So don't let disappointment make you bitter. Let it make you better. Don't let it harden your heart. Let it deepen your trust. Every no is leading you to a greater yes. Every closed door is pointing you to the right one. Every loss is making room for a greater gain. You don't serve a God who wastes pain. Every tear you've cried, every night you've wrestled, every moment you thought you couldn't take another step, it all becomes the raw material that God uses to build your testimony. There is purpose in your pain. There is destiny in your disappointment. The thing you thought would break you is the very thing God will use to bless you. That's why you can't quit in the middle of the story. Don't stop in the valley. Keep walking because the promise is on the other side. And when you feel like giving up, remind yourself, God's delays are not God's denials. He may not show up when you want him, but he is always right on time. The same God who allowed the disappointment is the same God who has prepared the promise. So lift your head, square your shoulders, and dry your tears. What you thought was the end is not the end. What you thought was rejection is redirection. And what you thought was over is only the beginning of what God is about to do. Disappointment is not your final destination. It's the bridge that carries you to promise. And when God brings you through, you'll look back and realize what you feared losing was nothing compared to what he was preparing. 7, sometimes the hardest part of walking with God is trusting him in the silence. You pray, you fast, you weep before him, and yet there are moments when heaven feels quiet. The silence can make you question whether God still hears you, whether he still cares, whether he's still working on your behalf. But I came to remind you, silence is not absence. Delay is not denial. Just because you can't hear him doesn't mean he isn't speaking through the circumstances, shaping the path, and preparing something far greater than you could ever imagine. When God is quiet, he is often working the loudest in the unseen places. Think about a seed planted in the soil. You don't hear it breaking open. You don't see the roots stretching down. You don't witness the invisible work beneath the dirt. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean nothing is happening. Growth always begins underground. That's why you can't give up when you don't see progress. The roots have to go deep before the fruit can appear. Many of us mistake God's silence for punishment, but often his silence is preparation. He is conditioning your character to carry the weight of your promise. He is pruning away distractions so that when the door opens, you will walk through ready. It's not that he's ignoring you, it's that he's investing in you. He's aligning people, positioning opportunities, and shifting circumstances so that when the moment arrives, everything fits together perfectly. We live in an impatient world. We scroll for instant updates. We want instant breakthroughs, instant healing, instant provision. But God is not rushed by your clock. He is not limited by your deadlines. He works outside of time, weaving eternity into your temporary situation. What looks like a delay in your eyes is perfect timing in his hands. If he gave it to you too soon, you wouldn't be ready. If he released it before the season was ripe, the blessing would crush you instead of carry you. That's why it's dangerous to force open doors that God has not unlocked. If you break your way into it before it's time, you'll spend more energy trying to keep it than enjoying it. Wait on the Lord. Trust his timing. Rest in his silence. Sometimes the silence is his greatest answer, because in it he is shaping faith that doesn't need constant reassurance. Faith that can withstand the storms. Faith that can endure the waiting. Faith that says, even if I don't see it, even if I don't hear it, I still believe he's working for me. Think about Lazarus. When he died, the family sent word to Jesus and he delayed. By the time he showed up, Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days. To them, it looked too late. To them, silence meant abandonment. But what they didn't know was that the delay set the stage for a greater demonstration of his power. If Jesus had shown up when they wanted him, Lazarus would have been healed. But because he waited, Lazarus was resurrected. The miracle was greater than the disappointment. And that's exactly what God is doing in some of your lives. You think it's too late. You think it's over. You think the silence means it won't happen. But what if the silence is God setting the stage for a bigger testimony? What if the delay is positioning you for something that will not just bless you, but bless everyone who sees it? So don't despise the waiting room. Don't let silence steal your confidence. Don't allow delay to rob you of destiny. The God who was with you in the beginning is still with you in the silence. And when he finally speaks, when he finally moves, when he finally opens the door, you'll realize he was never late. He was right on time. Hold steady in the silence, because when God breaks it, he will bring a promise so powerful that it will silence every doubt you ever had. There are times when God will allow the very thing you counted on to be shaken. He will let what you thought was stable suddenly wobble. What you thought was permanent suddenly crumble. And what you thought would always be there suddenly slip away. Not because he's punishing you, but because he's teaching you where your foundation really is. We build our lives on jobs, on relationships, on finances, on titles, on our own strength. And when those things shift, it exposes what we've been leaning on more than him. You see, if you lean too heavily on people, you'll collapse when they walk away. If you lean too much on your own understanding, you'll stumble when life no longer makes sense. If you lean too much on what you can see, you'll fall apart when God moves in ways that are invisible. So sometimes he has to let things shake, not to destroy you, but to direct you back to him, because he is the only foundation that cannot be moved. The Bible says everything that can be shaken will be shaken, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. That means the storm isn't sent to destroy you. It's sent to reveal what's real. It shows you who's with you and who's against you. It shows you what's temporary and what's eternal. It shows you the difference between what was built on sand and what was built on rock. We love stability, but sometimes our stability becomes our crutch. We hold on to the familiar because it feels safe, even when it's too small for where God is taking us. So he has to disturb the nest. He has to allow discomfort to push us out of what no longer serves us. You don't grow when you're comfortable. You grow when you're stretched. You grow when you're forced to lean on him instead of your own wisdom. Think about the disciples in the boat. They thought the storm was going to take them under. The winds were fierce. The waves were crashing, and they panicked. They cried out, "Master, don't you care that we perish?" But what they didn't realize was that the storm wasn't stronger than the Savior who was with them. And when he stood up and spoke, "Peace, be still," everything had to obey. The shaking wasn't meant to sink them. It was meant to show them the power of the one who was riding with them. Some of you are in that place right now. Life is shaking. Circumstances are unstable. What you thought would last didn't. What you planned didn't work out. But hear me, if it can be shaken, it wasn't your foundation. God is stripping away what's fragile so he can anchor you to what's unshakable. He's teaching you not to put your hope in the job or the bank account or even in people, but in him. Because when everything else falls, he still stands. And let me tell you this, the shaking is also preparation. When a tree is shaken, the dead leaves fall off. When your life is shaken, the things that cannot carry you forward are removed. That disappointment that hurt you, it wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to release you. That betrayal that cut you deep, it wasn't meant to stop you. It was meant to separate you from those who couldn't handle your future. That setback you didn't see coming, it was really a setup for something better than what you lost. So don't panic in the shaking. Don't lose your faith in the storm. Don't misinterpret the instability as abandonment. The shaking is proof that God is building something unshakable in you. He's taking you deeper, he's rooting you stronger, and he's preparing you for a weight of glory that cannot be taken away. When everything else is unstable, trust the one who cannot be moved. Because when the dust settles, you'll still be standing, not because of what you held on to, but because of who was holding you. Faye, there's a reason change makes us uncomfortable. It demands that we leave behind what's familiar, even when the familiar is no longer fruitful. And here's the truth. You cannot step into the new thing God is doing while still holding tightly to the old. Change requires release. You cannot pick up tomorrow if your hands are still clinging to yesterday. You cannot embrace a new season if you're still nursing the wounds of the last one. Some of us pray for God to open doors, but when he does, we're too afraid to walk through them because the hallway in between feels uncertain. We cry out for new beginnings, yet when the ending arrives, we fight to keep it alive. But if you never let go, You'll never grow. If you never release what's fading, you'll never embrace what's forming. God never closes one chapter without preparing another. But you can't read the new page if you're still stuck rereading the last one. Think about Abraham. God told him, leave your father's house and go to a land I will show you. Notice he didn't give Abraham a map. He gave him a command. And Abraham had to leave what was safe, what was familiar, what was predictable, and step into a journey of faith. If Abraham had clung to what he knew, he never would have discovered the promise God had for him. Release is not about loss, it's about trust. It's saying, God, I may not understand, but I believe you have something greater ahead of me than what I've left behind. And let's be honest, release hurts. Saying goodbye to what you thought would last forever isn't easy. Watching relationships change, watching opportunities dry up, watching seasons shift, it cuts deep. But pain doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes pain is the sign that God is pruning. Jesus said, every branch that bears fruit, the Father prunes it so it can bear more fruit. That means when he cuts something back, it's not rejection, it's preparation. You're not being diminished, you're being positioned for more. That's why you have to be careful not to confuse closed doors with closed destiny. Just because something ended doesn't mean your purpose ended with it. Just because one opportunity dried up doesn't mean the river of God's favor has run dry. He said, behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth, shall you not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. That means even in places that look barren, he can still bring forth life. So if he's calling you to release, don't resist. Trust that what's ahead is greater than what's behind. Sometimes he removes what you wanted to give you what you needed. Sometimes he ends what you were depending on to push you toward what he's destined you for. If you're too busy holding on, you'll miss the miracle that requires open hands. And let me say this. You don't have to have it all figured out to move forward. Too many people miss their moment because they're waiting for every detail to make sense. But faith isn't about certainty. It's about trust. You can step into the unknown with confidence when you know the one who holds the future. Your job is obedience. His job is outcome. Your job is surrender. His job is supply. I believe with everything in me that if you'll dare to release what no longer fits, God will amaze you with what he has prepared. Stop mourning the season that's over and start expecting the season that's coming. Stop rehearsing the pain of what left and start rejoicing for what's about to arrive. Because what God has in front of you is greater than anything that's behind you. So let go, release it, trust him. Because the moment you stop clinging to what was, you free yourself to receive what is and what's to come. And when you do, you'll discover this truth. Your future doesn't begin when you understand. It begins when you release. The hardest part of change isn't always the leaving. It's the waiting. It's that in between space where you've let go of what was, but you haven't yet laid hold of what will be. It's the wilderness between Egypt and the promised land, between the burial and the resurrection, between the seed in the ground and the harvest in your hand. And let me tell you, waiting can feel like the most uncomfortable season of all. You're no longer who you used to be, but you're not yet who you're becoming. You're in transition, and transition will test your faith like nothing else. This is where many people stumble, because waiting feels like nothing is happening. But let me reassure you, just because you can't see movement doesn't mean God isn't working. Seeds do their greatest work underground. Babies develop in the dark before they're ever born into the light. Caterpillars transform in hidden cocoons before they ever spread their wings. Silence is not absence. Delay is not denial. God does his deepest work in the seasons where you feel like nothing is moving at all. Sometimes we think God's promises should happen instantly, but the truth is, promises come with a process. And the process is what prepares you to handle the promise when it arrives. If he gave it to you too soon, it would crush you instead of bless you. If he opened the door before you were ready, you wouldn't have the strength to walk through it. Waiting is not wasted time. It's training time. It's the season where he strengthens your faith, shapes your character, and teaches you to lean on him when everything else feels uncertain. Think about Joseph. God gave him a dream that he would rise to power, but before he ever wore a crown, he wore chains. Before he sat on a throne, he sat in a prison. For years, it seemed like the opposite of the promise was happening. Yet every betrayal, every setback, every season of waiting was building the resilience he would need to handle the weight of leadership. If Joseph had gotten bitter in the pit or given up in the prison, he never would have seen the palace. Sometimes your greatest preparation looks like your deepest pain. And while you're waiting, the enemy will try to whisper lies into your ear. He'll say, if God really loved you, you wouldn't be here this long. He'll say, if the promise was real, it would have happened by now. He'll tempt you to give up on what God said because of what you see. But don't you dare let temporary delay convince you that God's word has expired. His word cannot return void. His timing may not match your clock, but his timing is always perfect. The truth is, God often uses waiting to test your trust. Will you still worship when the promise hasn't come? Will you still pray when the answer is delayed? Will you still believe when the evidence seems thin? That's the kind of faith that pleases God, faith that says, even if I don't see it yet, I still believe. Even if I don't feel it yet, I still trust. Even if I don't have it in my hands, I know it's in his. So don't waste your waiting. Don't fill it with complaining or comparing. Don't despise the delay. Let it develop you. Keep your eyes on God. Keep your hands lifted in worship, and keep your heart steady in trust, because one day, suddenly, the shift will happen. The door will swing open. The promise will manifest, And when it does, you'll look back and realize the waiting was worth it because the waiting made you ready. Hold on, stay faithful, stay expectant, because while you're waiting, God is working. And when He